Building confidence and trust in every customer every day. Ressler Siding and Windows.
This is Tom Gerhardt.
And I'm Lauren Culber.
Weeknights at 6 on K-Fire Radio. Hear the latest news, weather, and sports live from KX News.
KX News, weeknights at 6 on AM 550 K-Fire Radio.
The Legislature Today show continues. Don't forget to check local listings for a nightly recap on a cable access channel near you. The Legislature Today, hosted by Dale Wetzel, managing editor of Great Plains News and the Great Plains Examiner. Okay. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, too. And now, back to the Legislature Today show.
Good evening. This is Dale Wetzel. This is the Legislature Today radio hour. In our second half hour, we're going to be speaking to Andy Peterson, the president of the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, about the North Dakota legislature and where things are going right now. I think it's day 65, is it?
Something like that, yes.
It's the mid-60s. I usually know this because you get a copy of the Senate and House calendar every day, and right at the top it says day 65, day 64, whatever the day is, and it sometimes it creeps up on you how high that total goes. And of course we have 15 or so more days left in the legislative session, and I guess from where I sit it appears to be a long way from being over. There are a number of budget decisions that still need to be made in terms of how property taxes are going to be reduced, how income and individual income and corporate taxes are going to be reduced, how much money is going to be spent on education, what's going to be done with the higher education system. There was in the House, there's a quite extensive amendment to the higher education spending bill that gives quite a bit of power to the Chancellor's office in determining building projects. And there's just any number of things that are going on. Andy, what sort of mindset do you take on as a person who watches a lot of different bills? What sort of mindset do you take on in the closing days? Is it kind of like being the cat in the rocking chair room?
Well, it's more like a basketball game. We play the whole session, and all of a sudden you get down to the last 5 minutes. You kind of know where the game may or may not be going. But there's a lot of timeouts and a lot of things that may or may not happen. And so you are anxiously awaiting. People, I think, are tired, exhilarated, at the same time, energized, depressed, and all these emotions go through people's heads. And then we watch the legislators, and we watch their faces. Some of them are really crabby. Some of them are a little more bored. Some of them are really focused. So, it all depends on what issue you're watching. But there's a lot going on right now, and there's a lot to get done. Some really major fights, I think, that will have to be fought before the end is here.
What do you think is the dynamic that's introduced by the fact that a number of legislators don't have much to do? Their committee work is done.
Yeah.
They have some conference committees, but the big work these days is concentrated in the appropriations committees where the budget is written, and you have a number of legislators that don't have the full schedule that they're used to. And what sort of dynamic does this introduce into the session?
Well, what you'll get there is you'll get a few legislators wandering the halls, and you'll see them come down, get their coat on, maybe go out to their car, go down and get coffee somewhere, that kind of thing. And yet others, those are the ones I talked about a few minutes ago that were really focused. Their workload actually increases. So a smaller amount of them get more work to do while a larger portion of them are bored. Mostly freshmen or people that aren't senior committee members. Those kinds of folks are the ones that are a little more bored. But really, it's the power brokers now that kind of come to focus. And so that's the dynamic we see. And, you can just pick them out as you walk the halls. You know exactly who those people are and what decisions they're making about what bills and what they've got to get done. So it's interesting.
Is this a good time to get to know folks a lot better? Maybe you've identified someone as an up-and-comer and a newer person, and they're around. They don't have much to do.
Yeah.
You can kind of get to know them better. You have time to do that?
You can do that, but at the same time, you're really focused on that smaller group. So you can sit in the cafeteria. That's always a great place to meet folks. Or you can stand around down by the courtroom or the bill room, and you can chat with those folks. And sure, you can get to know them, but that's really not where our interest lies at this point. So it is a good time to get to know them and a poor time to get to know them. I think it's better to get to know them in the off season, at golf tournaments and social gatherings and, those kinds of things. That's really the way to get to know them, I think.
How many bills are you following right now?
We started out following a vast number of bills, probably 125 to 150 bills. Some of those have been killed and moved down. There's probably, I really think it's categories for us right now that we're watching. Taxes, some of these workforce safety and insurance bills that are kind of coming to fruition. So it's categories for us, and we're really probably down to a half a dozen categories that we're watching. And, of course, as you know, Dale, that a bill could go away and all of a sudden it comes back in some other form or might get attached as an amendment, both in a pro sense for us or a con sense. So, you might want to be watching out for something that comes back that you thought you had taken care of. But really it's categories.
How much of your time is spent trying to make sure that something that you didn't like doesn't resurrect itself magically in another bill, or promoting the idea of something that you do like, which may have not gotten a good reception initially, bring that back?
There's a couple of bills that I'm watching that didn't initially get a great reception, and those have come back in other forms. And so I'm spending a little bit of time making sure that the coalition that we're working with on that particular bill is all really still teed up and making sure that it gets to the next step. So that's taken a little bit of time, making sure that something doesn't come back probably 20% of our time, and that's actually, I think we've got that well in hand. The rest of the time is really spent trying to get the big things passed that we want.
One of the things that was approved this week, actually got final approval, it's on its way to the governor, is the expansion of Medicaid insurance coverage. And I wanted to know what you thought of that in terms of its effect on the business community and how it ameliorates the effect of the Affordable Care Act on business in North Dakota.
The Affordable Care Act is something that was not something that we promoted, is not something that most North Dakotans, endorse. But it is reality. It is the law of the land. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves in the business community really kind of carrying the heavy lift of this thing. There are 16 or 18 new taxes that are coming. The first one is coming in 2014. And yet at the same time, the legislature, as we all know, sent this very big signal the last session that they wanted nothing to do with it. And so that has kind of clouded the whole thought process regarding anything health care in this session. And one of those issues was Medicaid expansion. And this was part of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, PPAC, or whatever you care to call it, that we had an opportunity to take advantage of. Now, we're going to start paying those taxes, as I mentioned, and those will start supposedly covering some of these things like Medicaid expansion. And so the signal they sent, we don't like Obamacare, we don't like Medicaid expansion, but at the same time, we realized that if we didn't bring this in, what would happen to the business community is they would pay the tax, but they wouldn't get any of the benefits. And so we have pushed actually pretty hard for Medicaid expansion and spent a lot of time in the Human Services committees. It was an easier lift in the House to get it done. It was harder in the Senate. And
was that surprising to you?
That was actually a little surprising. I thought the House would have
I thought it'd be the other way around.
Actually. Yeah, actually. I thought the House would be tough, but Majority Leader Carlson actually pushed it on that side. And so when it came to the Senate side, it was a huge deal over there. And we worked with partners that we don't normally work with on this. Politics makes strange bedfellows, but at the end of the day, we got it done, and got it done fairly handily. We had 33 votes in favor. We thought we only had 28. We were banking on 27, of course, that we needed, and got 33. So, people were surprised at it. We had a few folks that were disappointed. Others said it was a bitter pill, and they voted for it because of the reasons I just talked about. But we got it done at the end of the day.
How does this Medicaid expansion make the Affordable Care Act more acceptable to business folks than it otherwise would be?
That's a very good question, because what happens in healthcare is that hospitals can't turn anyone away. And if you don't have insurance, you generally aren't going to the doctor for preventative care. And so when you really get stuck into a bind and you haven't done the primary care, let's say you have type 2 diabetes, for instance, and you're not taking care of yourself and you're not buying the things that you need to do, insulin and so forth, you end up in the emergency care room. And they can't turn you away. You get your health care there. It's very expensive, but someone's paying for that. And how they're paying for it is it's generally through higher insurance rates to those of us who give insurance to our employees. And so that's why we really wanted to see the expansion of Medicare. So more people would get primary care. At the end of the day, it would be a little less expensive for their health care, and they wouldn't end up in the insurance or the emergency room, rather, and then we wouldn't pay for it kind of through a cost shift. So that was our reasoning with this thing. Whether that is, at the end of the day, right or wrong, that remains to be seen. But that's the thinking that we had. The other thing that we looked at is that it was a cost shift, that hospitals needed to get. They have a lot of folks that I just mentioned that get their health care that way, and they disappear then, and it's bad debt for the hospital. So, again, we wanted to address some of those issues.
Just generally speaking, do you think the legislature's been tight with a buck?
On some fronts, they've been extremely tight with a buck. On other fronts, they're willing to spend on things that you go, whoa. The whole abortion debate, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Whether you agree with that or disagree with that, that's going to cost our state a pretty penny. Maybe upwards in the, 1, 2, I've heard $10 million, I've heard $30 million. I mean, who knows what that actual figure is. But they were willing to go there pretty quickly on that front. And on other fronts, they wouldn't spend a nickel, even though it seemed to make sense to the average person. So it depended upon which side of the aisle you were from. So I guess the answer is really it depends on what they were talking about. One
of the things that I was thinking of where I think the legislature personally has been maybe a bit tight with the buck has been on daycare,
yes,
child care aid, and also preschool education.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you there. I think to the legislature's credit, they've gone through the debate process, and I'm not sure that when it comes to daycare that we've come up with a really good model yet. That's been one of the things that I've been frustrated with because we've talked about daycare. That's important to employers because you want your employees to show up to work all the time. Daycare's in tight supply. It's not really the kind of business that you want to make. You can make a lot of money in. And so we wanted that issue addressed. And yet they haven't really given any money to it yet. There's a couple of bills coming together right now in the final form that may address some of it. And they've been a little tight with the buck there. In some perspectives, rightfully so. In other perspectives, they've been dead wrong on this thing.
Well, I was thinking about the series of public meetings that were held, and every one you went to, childcare was a big thing.
It was
big
huge.
thing. And I thought, given that,
yeah,
in the run-up to the session, I thought, man, because childcare has been a tough row to hoe in the legislature, and so has preschool, because
right,
full-day kindergarten is a fairly recent phenomenon in North Dakota. State financing for it.
Can I wait? Do you really think it's the state's responsibility to fund child care?
Well, that's
help me understand it.
That's one of
Are you kidding me?
One of the philosophical arguments that's made about this whole issue, and that is what that's a common opinion. It's a common opinion that's expressed. That people say pre-K school. Well, it's just child care by another name.
I mean,
or also having child care subsidies for child care centers. People say, well, for one thing, if it's in such high demand, why can't the market take care of it? For one thing, and another thing is it the state's responsibility to assure parents have child care? I guess you can have that argument, but
and how do you address all those problems? And that's the second part of it.
I mean, the regulation's one thing, but if it's funding. I can see it if it's a benefit that they put together for state employees. But as a business guy, I wonder, do I have to be funding that? I mean, was that what you're speaking about?
There's aside from the argument, should government be in it or not, there are some practical ways the state could address some of this, and we haven't gotten to that point yet. But let me just reference a business up in Tioga that has built a new building, and they've built a child care center there. In a case like that, I would be very in favor, and while credits are always controversial, I would be very in favor of giving someone like that a credit. Not only are they taking care of their own employees and subsidizing out of their own pocket some of the operational costs of it, they are now bringing in children from other businesses and taking care of them. So to me, that's the ideal spot there.
Yeah.
But I think you could get by with some tax credits for people like that may address some of the issues and then let the market take care of it. I think where we've gotten in trouble in the legislature is we've gotten into the topics about subsidies, subsidizing the operations. And I think the fear, and maybe rightfully so on some fronts, is that we'll get into this and we won't be able to get out of it. And so the legislature has drugged their feet. It's not a great venue to have these discussions, however.
Yeah.
You need to have these discussions before the legislature starts so that you can come in with a plan. And when your plan might not be as coherent as it could be, it gets spit out by the legislature. And that's, I think, from my perspective, what we're seeing here.
Well, I guess I feel for these young couples who are just making $10, $12, $14 an hour. They're getting started. Maybe they got an average education. Maybe they don't even have one, and now they got child care. I mean, how do you make that work?
Well, and it's expensive, Gary.
I know. And
I was shocked.
I agree. I've been kind of in the middle of talking through that internally within our family with a young son who's they got a child. And so when you think of it, as a parent, I'm saying, okay, I might have to help them for a period of time, and I take that on as a responsibility.
Yeah.
I just wonder the role of government in that. And I would just – because I have to admit I haven't followed it, but I was listening to you guys kind of passively here, and all of a sudden I'm going, huh? So I just had to, for listeners out there, to say,
well, and that's
what's
a good
the
point.
argument? I'd like to just understand it.
Fortunately, you can help your family.
Yeah.
I can help my children, and I do. But on the same token, I was chatting with a young mother at the Capitol the other day, and I asked her what her daycare bill was. We were talking about daycare. And she has 2 kids going into preschool next year, and she expects to spend $1,200 per month, which absolutely blew me away that it was that expensive.
Yep.
My kids are gone.
That's typical too.
Yeah, very typical. Yeah.
Well, and I was
tough stuff.
I was shocked at that.
Yeah.
So it's a complicated issue, no matter how you look at it, and from our perspective at the Chamber, we want to make sure, again, that employees get to work on a regular basis so that companies can be successful. So that's our take on it.
Okay, I didn't mean to get carried away.
No,
it's fine. I mean, that is exactly the one of the strains of thought that influences the debate here is that, one of the arguments is, okay, what is the state doing in this business in the first place? And I think that one of the problems here has been that, when the problem is presented in full, especially in western North Dakota, it's overwhelming.
It is.
And you just get this sense of, I listen to the child care advocates and other folks talk about it, and you almost get a sense of helplessness about, my goodness, it's such a huge need and so little supply, and one of the answers that's presented is to subsidize daycare centers, and that's not a very attractive position to hold.
What my 2 cents were, I grew up going back, let's date me a little bit, I'm in my mid-50s, but many people cared for kids in their home fairly economically, and as regulations began to proceed into the process, now you get to $600 to $800 for a kid. And if mom could bring in 3-4 kids and babysit, because we're talking 2, 3, 4-year-old kids right before pre-K or kindergarten. I mean, mom, if they were getting $400, 3 kids, $1,200 is a lot of money to a family, but we've made regulations so difficult in the daycare. I mean, maybe they ought to spend time thinking about loosening that up a little bit so moms could have a nice little income for those that stay home, because they've raised families, etc. I mean, but we've made the regulations so difficult.
Well, and you want to make sure that whatever mom is taking care of some other kids, that it's a safe environment. I would have to admit that I couldn't do that job.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exhausting in my mind. And
I don't know for small operations. I don't know if state regulation is a big impediment. I think it's mostly
daycare centers.
When you're talking about larger operations, yes, state regulations do play a role. I think in terms of whether one gets going or not. But if you're talking about
2-3 kids,
2-3 children, I don't know if there are state regulations at play, yes, but I'm not sure to what extent they are a barrier to the entry to a business. I think it could be more like whether you want to do it or not.
Yeah, and I have to say, Dale, that when I look at moms who do this and people who do child care, the good ones. Thank God they're out there, and we want to make sure that we keep them in the industry somehow, because really they are taking care of our children and grandchildren, and we want great child care. So that's the other part of this whole equation. Not only is it complicated and overwhelming, you want good child care. You just don't want to drop them off somewhere not knowing if they're being taken care of and making progress in their little lives.
One of the things I've been keeping track of in the recent days have been as the budget bills, the newly massaged budget bills come up, are little things that are included in some of them and how appropriate they are to to spend the taxpayers' money on. And we've talked about some of these earlier in the show. We have $350,000 to purchase a marina on Lake Sakakawea. We have $42,500 to buy a gentleman's military artifacts collection. We have $185,000 to purchase the Lawrence Welk homestead, which I might add that Lawrence Welk himself wasn't interested in when he was still alive. But he literally refused to visit it or support it financially. Now the taxpayers are being asked to acquire it, and we also had this has been removed from the Parks and Rec budget. Well, we had, I think, $2.8 million to purchase a ski resort and a private business up in northeastern North Dakota near Walhalla. And I asked the legislators, well, why is it that you're doing this? And the answer was, well, the guy wants to sell it. Well, that doesn't sound like a.
I got a couple places I can get rid of.
Yeah.
That doesn't
I got a couple used cars. Maybe I could.
That doesn't
send
sound
over.
like a good enough reason to me.
That's right.
And these frankly, these are minor sums.
They are minor
in the scheme of things. But on the other hand, you kind of wonder if they're doing these sorts of expenditures with small amounts of money. I mean, what's happening to the big sums? I don't know. It just kind of strikes me wrong, and I just wonder about how significant it is.
Well, I think your initial reaction it kind of strikes you wrong. And at the same time, we see some of these things that come in and get tacked on as amendments. Somebody's wanting to bring something home to some district for some reason. You don't know why. I think the greater question to me is will we be stuck with them, and what will it cost us in the future? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of state parks around the country that someone donated land or a homestead, and all of a sudden it becomes a state park, and it becomes very costly. And then someone has to maintain it. And do we really want that? I don't know. I guess that's really the question in my mind. I can't imagine that. Now, I may get in trouble with this, but I can't imagine that owning the Lawrence Welk homestead is going to further our economic prosperity here in North Dakota. I'm not sure it will.
When I went down, I visited the homestead a couple of times because it is actually, aside from the fact that Lawrence Welk was born there.
Maybe you ought to buy it. And
No. It's a sod house. It's a good period piece of 1920s living in that part of the world. But frankly, it's very seldom visited.
Yeah.
And God bless Lawrence Welk, but is anybody going to know who he is or was 50 years from now?
Yeah.
And, he might still be playing on Prairie Public Broadcasting, but I don't know to what extent he is such a world-bestriding historical figure that his birthplace is going to be a place of interest in 100 years from now.
If he was at a minimum a senator or a president, I could understand owning this piece of property. But if you even ask people in my office, and the people that work there are younger than I am, if you ask them about the show Leave It to Beaver, they'll go, huh. Or I asked them about Mayberry RFD the other day, and one of them had not heard of Andy Griffith. Mm-hmm. Which seems impossible to me.
I mean, at least they've seen Matlock, for crying out loud.
Yeah, well, maybe. Yeah, maybe.
You got a couple young ones there.
We do have a couple young ones, but they don't pay attention to this stuff. So I think, to your point, this homestead, while it might be a great period piece and it might be something that a nonprofit picks up, I'm not sure the state should do it.
Yeah, I mean, and as I say, these are very minor things in terms of the overall state budget, but still, there's something that's odd about asking the taxpayers to jump in and purchase a place like this. We've been speaking to Andy Peterson, who is the president of the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, about the progress of the North Dakota legislature. We also have with us Gary Emeneth, who is my co-host, a Bismarck businessman and former chairman of the North Dakota Republican Party. This is Dale Wetzel, and this is the Legislature Today Radio Hour, and good evening.